Escaped war criminals, sealed wartime records, powerful figures protected for decades, despite disturbing accusations, hidden treasures, prophecies, and more. These are 10 things the Vatican has refused to acknowledge for centuries. Part 2. When Europe was piecing itself back together in 1945, hundreds of high-ranking Axis officers managed to get out of Europe and start over in South America. They used hidden escape routes through Italy that people called ratlines. A ton of these paths went right through Rome. And on their way out, these guys were handed fresh fake IDs, Red Cross passports, and stacks of cash. This wasn't just happening in dark alleys either, it was happening inside church buildings. One bishop named Alois Hudal worked right out of Rome and bragged about helping these guys get away. He said saving them from Soviet communists was just a good Christian thing to do. Another priest ran an escape station out of a local monastery. He hid guys like a ruler who ran a brutally violent government in Croatia, and for years church leaders said priests were only giving out basic charity to regular war refugees, but decades later, old files were opened up. They showed high-level staff knew exactly who was walking in the door. Some historians think leaders wanted to save these guys to fight communists in the Cold War. Others think Rome was just overwhelmed by refugees and looked the other way. The main question was, though, how far up the chain of command did the final okay actually go? Back in the 30s and 40s, Pope Pius XII made a specific choice. As millions of people were rounded up and killed across Europe, he almost never called out the German government by name. People have been fighting about this ever since. Critics say a leader with that much power needed to speak up, saying that a direct statement from him could have turned public opinion, helped slow the fascist regime down. On the flip side, though, his defenders say speaking out would have just backfired. The Germans would have retaliated and shut down all the secret networks hiding tens of thousands of Jewish families in Italian convents and monasteries. Nobody could check the facts for a long time, because the Vatican kept its war records secret. Of course, that just made people even more suspicious. Then in 2020, Pope Francis finally opened the archives. Researchers checked the files and found letters showing staff got early reports about all the mass killings in Eastern Europe, but inside the office, some staff weren't sure if the reports were actually true. So files didn't show an outright conspiracy, but they did show there was some level of awareness of what was going on. For decades, Father Marcial Maciel was treated like a hero in Rome. He was amazing at bringing in money and getting young men to join the priesthood. He started a group called the Legion of Christ that grew super wealthy. It was so popular, he used to travel right alongside Pope John Paul II, but behind the scenes, victims were trying to get help as far back as the late 40s. Former students reported severe physical and mental torment. They also said he was living a secret double life with hidden families. For 50 years, every single complaint got thrown into a desk drawer and forgotten. Maciel was close friends with powerful cardinals, and his group kept giving millions of dollars to the Vatican, and that money basically brought him total protection. The church finally did something in 2006 under Pope Benedict. They told Maciel to step down and just live a quiet life of prayer. Later on, internal documents admitted that he was guilty, but nobody ever explained why 50 years of warnings were ignored while he kept getting more powerful. Theodore McCarrick was one of the most powerful leaders in the American Catholic Church. As the Archbishop of Washington, he brought in millions of dollars in donations, but for almost his entire career, bad rumors followed him from city to city. There were accusations about him taking advantage of young men. As far back as 1999, clear letters were sent straight to Vatican staff, warning them that promoting McCarrick would cause a massive scandal if the public ever caught wind of it. Well, those warnings were swept aside. He was made a cardinal in 2001, was often sent on high-profile diplomatic trips around the world. When the allegations finally broke open in the news, Pope Francis removed him from the priesthood in 2019. To try to calm all the anger, the Vatican released a massive 450-page investigation in 2020. The document showed a clear paper trail, blind spots, political favors, and leaders who repeatedly chose to believe McCarrick's word over all the written reports from victims. Over 2,000 years, the Holy See put together one of the most valuable collections of items on earth. Crowns covered in gems, ancient solid gold cups, priceless historic books. But if you try to trace where all those items are today, well, massive chunks of the record books don't exist. Part of the issue comes down to war. When Napoleon Bonaparte's troops marched into Rome in 1798, They packed up tons of gold, arts, and ancient papers to take home as payment. Long before that, during the sack of Rome in 1527, soldiers melted down hundreds of years of historic gold metalwork into plain bars just to pay off army debt. And things were so bare by 1800, when Pope Pius VII was crowned, the real papal crown was missing, and craftspeople had to make him a temporary one using not only fake gems, but, and I'm not joking, paper mache. Over the years, whenever items were sold in secret to pay off big debts or given away as gifts to world leaders, logs were very rarely updated, so there are thousands of historic items listed in old letters that are just completely uncatalogued even today. Back in the late 1100s, a monk from southern Italy named Joachim of Fiore came up with a new way to read the Bible. He taught that human history was divided into three big stages: the age of the Father, the age of the Son, and a coming age of the Holy Spirit. He predicted that this third age would start around the year 1260. The big catch was what he said would happen next, that this new age would bring a pure, direct connection to God, would make the official church, with all its wealthy buildings and fancy priests, completely unnecessary. According to him, people wouldn't need a pope or a priest anymore because everyone would be led directly by the Spirit. As you can probably imagine, church authorities were not crazy about this concept. After Joachim died, a group of his radical followers used his writings to directly question the Pope's power. Church councils moved to ban a bunch of his books, his writings were locked up, and some of his followers were even put on trial. So yeah, this was definitely something he wanted swept under the rug and forgotten about as swiftly as possible. When people think of the Roman Inquisition, they usually imagine secret trials in dark rooms, masked judges, this idea of absolute control of what people were allowed to think. Set up in 1542, this official department was tasked with tracking down banned books, scientific claims that went against the church's teachings, just anything they viewed as, untoward. So for hundreds of years, the documents from those trials were kept totally secret in Rome. Researchers outside the church couldn't read the actual court transcripts, famous figures like Galileo or the philosopher Giordano Bruno, but all the secrecy helped give rise to theories about what was kept locked up behind those closed doors. In 1998, Pope John Paul II opened those specific archives to certain qualified scholars, but what historians found was kind of surprising. Apparently the trials were written down with extreme detail. They were run like strict government offices and were generally less bloody than some of the rumors made things out to be. But the openness only went so far. Getting in to read the files is still strictly controlled today. Thousands of files are still classified or lost in storage vaults, so there's still not a totally full picture of how things really went. Padre Pio is loved by millions of people today as one of the most famous modern saints. Most people know him for the stigmata, those unexplained wounds on his hands and feet that match the wounds of Jesus. But way before he was ever made a saint, the church, let's just say, didn't really trust him much. Back in the 1920s, the Holy Office actually sent secret investigators to dig into him. Leaders were worried his popularity was turning into a bit of a circus, so they sent doctors to inspect his wounds. One high-ranking investigator wrote a pretty brutal report claiming Pio was just emotionally unstable, and he was buying carbolic acid to chemically burn his own skin to fake the marks. Well, Rome cracked down hard. After that, they banned Padre Pio from saying Mass in public, they stopped him from hearing confessions, told him he couldn't even speak to his followers. Crowds almost rioted over it though. Decades later, the church completely flipped its stance. They dropped all the bans, they embraced his massive following, and Pope John Paul II made him an official saint in 2002. So yeah, he went from officially being logged as a potential fraud to being one of the biggest icons of the faith. In 1595, a historian put out a book that had this really weird list of 112 short Latin phrases inside. The claim was that these lines were written way back in the 1100s by an Irish archbishop named Saint Malachy, and that they predicted every future pope all the way to the end of the world. The descriptions on the lists are super short, a bit vague. For example, entry number 101 was just light in the sky. Believers said, well, that obviously meant Pope Leo XIII because his family crest had a shooting star on it. Might seem like a bit of a stretch. The very last line describes a figure called Peter the Roman, who guides the church through a final period of mass destruction right before Rome gets wiped out. Most historians treat the whole document as a fake. Inscriptions for popes up until 1590 are suspiciously accurate, but everything after 1590 gets a bit vague and open to interpretation, which pretty much tells you someone forged it in the late 1500s to try and influence an election happening around that time. On May 13th, 1981, a Turkish man named Mehmet Ali Aka fired at Pope John Paul II right in the middle of a packed St. Peter's Square. The Pope barely survived. The attacker was caught right on the spot. Now, what should have been a simple open and shut case, though, turned into a mess of wild stories. During police questioning, the guy couldn't keep his story straight. First, he said he acted completely alone. Then he turned around and blamed the Bulgarian Secret Service and the Soviet KGB, saying they hired him to stop the Pope's anti-communist work in Poland. Later on, he changed his mind again and claimed he was getting divine messages or working with radical groups in Turkey. Italian investigators spent years digging into the Soviet link, but they couldn't find any solid evidence. At the same time, rumors started spreading about internal fights in the Vatican, huge money scandals with the Vatican Bank, and spies using the assassin as a distraction. The Vatican's official position was that God stepped in to save the Pope's life, but as for who, if anyone, actually paid for the hit, nobody really knows for sure. But that's been the video, and I will catch you, yes, you specifically, in the next one.